Just like people, animals can also experience complete or partial loss of their hearing. This can be from birth or at any point in the ageing process, particularly as they enter their senior years, but this isn't always the case. It can be gradual or sudden, depending on the cause, and it can also be temporary or permanent. As with any changes, if you think your animal may have changes to his or her hearing and you've noticed changes in their behaviour, please contact your vet. There may be treatments required for one of a number of potential causes, and your vet can have a look to actually make a diagnosis and treat them accordingly. Please don't put anything in your animal's ear yourself unless you've been advised to by your vet and instructed on how to do so safely. So you may notice that they're not responding to day-to-day noises. Maybe they're not paying attention when you call them if they would normally. They may have difficulties in waking up, potentially barking more than normal. They may be shaking or tilting their head, and they may no longer be greeting you at the door if that's something that they would normally do. So all behaviour changes should be discussed with your vet to check for any pain or health conditions that need treating. If it is their hearing, you can then get appropriate advice from your vet on what to do and treat anything that may be contributing to it, especially if it is something temporary. Once you've been to your vet, if you have a diagnosis of deafness or hearing loss, you can then take some steps to make things easier. Dogs in particular primarily use scent and sight to view the world, so they're very good at reading our body language and picking up cues that we're giving off that we don't realise we are. They can adapt well to hearing loss. In any case, remember that all animals are individuals and will have their own personalities, emotions, and needs, so that always has to be taken into account. You can use the same kind methods of training as just as well with a deaf dog or deaf animal as you can with ones that are hearing, but you just have to be a bit more mindful of getting their attention first. All you need to change really is use a visual signal such as hand signals instead of using your voice if you need to ask them to do something. And you just need to be a bit more conscious of your timing to make sure that they're looking at you first before you ask them to do something. You can start by getting them used to being touched in one area to get their attention for when they're not looking at you. And by using the same place each time, it will become a bit more familiar to them and a bit more predictable, which will help to reduce them from sort of startling if you've taken them by surprise. So I would do this very gently to start with them actually watching you so they can see what you're doing, and give them a treat afterwards. So it may be, depending if they've got any other conditions, you need to be careful where you're touching because you don't want to touch anywhere that's already painful. If, for example, you just want to tap them here very gently, that will become your spot to get their attention, or it might be on their shoulder, or just somewhere that's comfortable for them and easy for you to reach. But if you can pick a spot that they don't seem too bothered about, you can use that as your spot to get their attention, and give them a treat afterwards as well. So you touch it, they look at you, they get a treat just to reassure them that it's okay. Because sometimes they're not going to be looking at you, and if you need their attention, that could be an easy way of getting it. Once you've done it with them watching you a few times and they seem quite comfortable with it, you can start to do it when they're not looking at you, but again, very gently, but make sure that they know you're in the room first. When you do leave a room, try and let them see that you're leaving, and also make them aware of when you're approaching them. So if possible, if they are sitting or lying down, if you can approach them directly like that, they can see that you're coming. If they are startling and it's something that's happening frequently, it can cause emotional problems there if they start to become frightened or a little bit anxious of things making them jump, particularly if they're already in some kind of discomfort, particularly sort of in their muscles, if they're tensing up when they're startled, that's going to make more pain in their body. So you want to try and avoid them doing that as much as possible. You can also try and get their attention with movement. So obviously, if they're worried about people, if you have a dog that's had bad experiences in the past of people reaching over, you don't want to suddenly start throwing your arms at them. But if they're a bit of a distance away from you and you can just put your hands up and give them a wave, that might be enough to get their attention. Sometimes you can stomp your feet on the floor, which will create a bit of vibration in the floor, especially if they're standing on the same surface as you. They may feel the vibrations through the floor, and that might be enough for them to turn to see what's going on. And you can also switch lights on and off if you're indoors. That's something that you can use, or use a torch. So if you are doing that, don't shine it directly in their eyes, and also don't use those red laser pointers because they can then develop other behavioural problems from those. So try not to use those if possible. It's just a flash just to catch their eye, they can look around and see what's going on. So I'd spend time working on getting them to focus on you and pay attention to you with some games and some training. Reward them for checking in with you voluntarily, especially if you're with your dog and you're on a walk. If they're just happily moseying along and they look up at you, tell them that was good and give them a treat if you've got one, or a little fuss. Because if we reinforce them for doing that, we're going to be creating more opportunities to communicate with them later. If they're looking at you more frequently, you've got more windows to actually show them your hand signals and ask them to do things if there's something you need them to do. So teach them that it pays off to check in with you. Your treat delivery will need to be quite quick to make sure that they know what they're getting the treat for. So the less time there is between them doing something and a consequence, so getting a treat for, or a fuss, or whatever it is that they like, the stronger an association will be made between those two things. So get practicing with your treats, try and whip them out quite quickly and give them to your dog as soon as you can when they've done something. You could also teach them a marker. So for example, this would be to pinpoint the action that they've done that you're rewarding. You might usually say something like good, or yes, or use a clicker if that's something you like to use, and then give them the treat, or whatever else it is that they like. But in this case, you would use a visual signal, so something like a thumbs up, just to go, that's what you're getting the treat for, here's your biscuit, well done. Something else that may be useful might be attaching a bell to their collar, or a light, so when they're outside in the dark, if they're in your garden, or if they're not next to you on a walk, it would just make it easier for you to know where they are. They might not be able to hear traffic, so that is something that we need to think about. And they might also not be able to hear other dangers that may come their way. So unless they stay fairly close to you when you're out in public, it may be safer to keep them on a lead. Or if it's a cat, it might be safer to keep them indoors. You can buy long lines to offer them more freedom. So it will be a lead. You can buy them in various lengths. You can buy ones that are like 10 metres long, sort of a soft lead. They do take a bit of practice to get used to, and you can find out how to use them. I can show you if you need any help. But it means that you've got your dog safely. You can allow them that freedom to have some space away from you and do all the things that they need to do, but it means that they're not going to suddenly shoot off and go out of sight and potentially get into danger. So that is something we need to think about, because safety is a priority here. You can also adapt your house and garden to make it more interesting for cats and offer opportunities for suitable exercise and stimulation. I would say, particularly if you've had an outdoor cat and they've developed hearing loss or deafness and you are thinking about keeping them indoors, look into it and see what you can do to make that as stress-free as possible. And there's certainly things that we can look at for that. So don't just change it all of a sudden, but have a think about these things that we can change to make their life more comfortable and safer indoors. You can make your dog walks more interesting by trying different routes. You can allow them to sniff more, taking things with you to explore once you're out, and even resting outdoors with your dog. So when you've been for a bit of a walk, just sit down and chill out and take in all the sights and the smells around you, which can be a really nice way to bond with them still and just enjoy that time together outdoors and take things in. Something else to consider is that if your dog isn't profoundly deaf, if they do have some level of hearing, they may still be able to hear a very high pitched dog whistle. So it may allow for a little more freedom if that can be added into your training. You can also buy collars, slips to go on leads, bandanas, and actual leads themselves with "I am deaf" embroidered on them or printed onto them, just to raise a bit more awareness for the people around you. And you can teach different hand signals for different things, and it might be nice to base them on British Sign Language. So if you'd like ideas for what to use, you can do that. I'll post a video later with some examples. So as long as you are clear and consistent with the signals that you use, it doesn't matter too much. It just needs to be clear to your dog what you're asking and that it's the same thing every time. So your animals can have a great life being deaf or having hearing loss. They just need your understanding. There are lots of resources out there, and if you're ever unsure, you can contact your vet or a qualified behaviourist or trainer for advice, and they'll be happy to help guide you on your way. Thank you.